stepping off the ocean and literally onto the tracks in Wonder the World today. An interview, I have to confess, I almost feel like I don't want to do this interview in case I jinx it, because I have lost count of the number of times over the years that hopes have been raised and then dashed again on this subject. I'm talking about the project to resurrect the old Outeniqua Choo Tjoe, which is the steam train which used to travel the scenic line between Knysna and George on the Garden Route. And back in the day, it was one of the highlights of a Garden Route holiday to hop on the train and just drink in the most extraordinary views that were offered from that oceanside track. But it all came to nothing. Around about 2010, I think it was, that Transnet ceased operating the line, and there were various efforts over the years to find a new operator to take it over. But eventually the track began to fall into disrepair. Knysna area suffering fires. There were various weather events that caused damage to the space around the track, etc. And I think a lot of people had given up on hoping that it would ever be restored. So you can imagine my surprise to hear recently not just whispers, but suddenly a firm plan to see the old steam train whistle again. A business called Classic Rail has won the tender to return her to service. It has appointed contractor AfriTrack to begin work on the line, and they have already commenced the clearing of the rail reserve alongside the tracks to facilitate the bigger restoration that has to happen. So very exciting to know that not only is it a maybe, but it's a yes, and it's already underway. And to fill us in on what has brought us to this point and where to from here, the vision, the timeline, etc., it's a pleasure to have with us via Zoom this afternoon Martin Hatcheul for Classic Rail. Martin, great to have you on the show this afternoon. Welcome.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon.
Before we talk about the renewal plan, let's just start with a little bit of history of this train and this line, because the line was built well over a century ago. Was it always primarily a passenger route, or did it ever carry cargo as well, as far as you know?
The line was built between 1925 and 1928, and it was not originally only for passengers. It was always a freight line.
Okay.
It was only in about, I think it was 96. I'm open to correction there.
Yeah.
That the Transnet Heritage Foundation opened up the Outeniqua Choo Tjoe as an icon and a passenger service.
Okay.
But there was, before that, they would hook a passenger carriage onto the freight trains. So it's always carried passengers and freight.
Okay, that's an interesting part of the history I didn't know. You know, I grew up spending holidays on the Garden Route, but never actually went on the Outeniqua Choo Tjoe. But it was always so aware of the fact that it was something that sort of had to be ticked off the bucket list. And Martin, I know a lot of people considered it a huge loss when the train stopped running. Before we talk about why that happened, though, for those who don't know the route and where this particular track runs, can you explain what makes it so special?
Yeah, it runs from the George station, or actually from the George, from the Outeniqua Transport Museum in George, along the Merlin River and down to the Vic Bay, then across through the tunnel across Cayman's River, and then all the way along the Lakes District, past Tow River, Island Lake, Langvlei, and across the Swartvlei to Sedgefield, and then from Sedgefield via Gokama to Knysna, and across the Knysna River, of course, which is the other famous bridge. The two bridges, the Caymans and the Knysna bridges, the photographs of the trains on those two bridges have become iconic.
Absolutely, yeah. I just want to say, sorry to interrupt, Martin, if anybody listening to this has had the experience of traveling on the Outeniqua Choo Tjoe and wants to speak to us about what it was like back in the day and what you remember most about the trip, we would love to hear from you with either a voice note or a text to 072 567 1567 as we find out soon about the plans to make that possible again. Now, Martin, I mean, I've spent a lot of time in Knysna the last decade or so and often looked at that bridge and thought, oh gosh, what a shame that we we lost the opportunity to see that sight of the train steaming across, and also increasingly of late looked at it and thought, gosh, it almost looks like it's beyond the point of being brought back into service now. Let's talk about what happened to bring it to that point before we talk about what you're going to do next. Now, why did Transnet stop operating the passenger line? And I think it was around about 2010.
No, it was earlier than that. It was in 2006.
Earlier than that, 2006 already. Okay.
Floods. We had floods in 2006, and it damaged the railway line in a couple of places, and they had to stop the services. They did try to resurrect the service between Knysna and Mossel Bay, but that wasn't successful, and they closed that down.
Okay.
And I think that was in about 2010.
Okay, I think that's what I'm remembering, that final decision to say we walk away from it here. Okay, but you're absolutely right. Those floods causing extensive damage along the line much earlier than that. Now, as I mentioned at the start of this interview, there have been sort of stop-start stuttering efforts to say we can do this again. It would be such an amazing jewel in the crown of garden route tourism if we could get it running again, particularly given the increase we have seen in international visitors who would absolutely love the opportunity to experience this. Classic Rail has been part of the effort for quite some time. Martin, tell us a little bit about what has brought you to the point of finally being able to give it a go.
Yeah, our CEO, Alan McVitie, put in a report within months of the 2006 flood of how the line could be repaired and the train could be started again, but that wasn't accepted. And in the end, he put in 2 unsolicited bids, and we attended to 3 tenders.
Yeah.
And of course, this latest one is the one that we've been awarded. So that's over a period of 20 years.
Sure.
We've been at it, keep going and trying to convince Transnet to let us play on the line again.
And convince them you finally did. And not just convince them, but the tender signed and the work already in operation. Now, let's talk. Before we do this, let me just say for anybody coming in midway to this conversation, you're listening to Martin Hatcheul from Classic Rail, who were the successful bidders to win the tender to bring the Outeniqua Choo Tjoe back into operation. They have appointed contractors AfriTrack to start the immediate work on the line. And Martin, I gather they've been at it since December already. So let's start with the line. Can you explain what it is that they're busy doing and then what steps will follow thereafter?
Yeah, the AfriTrack guys are busy clearing the line between Sedgefield and Gokama. It's become quite overgrown. It's in the middle of plantations, so there's a lot of pine trees and other vegetation that's grown over the line, and they're clearing the line 5 meters either side of the center line, so that we can make a proper assessment of the track and decide how we're going to go forward with the renovation of the track.
Okay.
The clearing should go on to Knysna, and the reason that we've chosen Knysna to Sedgefield is that is the part of the track that has the least damage. Okay. And we expect to open the first phase of services between Knysna and Sedgefield in about a year's time.
That quickly already? Okay, so that was going to be my next question around the timeline. So as early as a year from now, you could be doing an abbreviated portion from Sedgefield. Sorry, did you say from Sedgefield to Knysna?
That's correct.
Okay.
We're planning to run 2 services when we're fully open.
Okay. Sedgefield
to Knysna will be called the Waterfront Express, and Knysna to the Sedgefield, to the George Rail, to the Outeniqua Transport Museum in George will be the Museum Unlimited.
Okay, so 2 separate trips. Will you be able to do the 2 connected and just go straight from one onto the other, or will they operate completely separately?
No, they'll operate separately.
Okay.
The reason that we're doing it this way was we found that the 3.5-hour trip was too long for tour operators, especially.
Okay.
The 2.5-hour trip from George to Knysna. They wanted very often they would drop their people off at George and pick them up again at Sedgefield and go on by bus from there.
Okay, that's
Or
interesting.
drop them off at Sedgefield and pick them up at Knysna. So they wanted a shorter service. So we're going to be offering 2 separate shorter services.
Okay, that means Sedgefield suddenly becomes very prominent in this story. And the Sedgefield Station, is that going to need any sort of upgrade as part of this project to turn it into your hub to service both directions?
Yes, we will be putting up a turntable and a steam workshop in Sedgefield to make it the hub for steam in the garden route.
Okay. A couple of listener comments and then some more questions from me. Lynn remembering, those train trips, the best scenery. It is so beautiful and such a fabulous experience for locals and visitors. Shirley remembering how as teenagers in the 1960s, they would often go caravanning in the wilderness. And she said occasionally we would even catch the train from Wilderness to George just to go to the movies in George. Let's see. Graziella writing in to say so many highlights on this trip, especially for the kids. The tunnel, Vic Bay, the Kymans River Bridge, a bridge where a car can drive right behind or in front of the train, the lovely Knysna route in over the lagoon. So Graziella, fond memories, as does Sarah have. She says, I travelled on the Choo Tjoe in 2005 as part of a church youth group who were visiting from the US. I remember that beautiful scenery, the smell of the train, going along the coast was amazing, as was travelling through the forested areas. The memory has always stayed with me. Lots of people are going to be very happy to know that this experience is being brought back to life. Now, before we leave the actual train tracks and talk about the train, Martin, you said the clearing work is clearing out that road reserve and getting rid of all the overgrowth, which will then allow a proper assessment of the track itself. We're talking about a track that, as you've just said, was laid between 1925 and 28. What sense do you have of the condition of the track and the railway sleepers themselves? Are they still in reasonable nick, or is there going to have to be a lot of replacement, do you think?
Well, the AfriTrack guys think that the track is in the sleepers are in reasonable nick.
Okay.
They reckon sort of 1 in 4 will need to be replaced.
Only 1 in 4 of a 100-year-old train line. That's that speaks to the quality of the way it was built initially and what it was built from, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's the track, and we've spoken about the station. Now let's talk about the thing that for many people is the big thing here, and that is the train itself. Firstly, what kind of condition is it in after all these years of being out of service, and what are the plans for it?
Well, there are, I think it's 4 different steam locomotives that are available to us. 2 are at the moment stored in George. Their brass parts were stolen, so they're going to have to be renovated. And what we plan to do is our renovations will take place in Germiston. We'll road haul the locos to Germiston where they'll be renovated. That's part of the reason for the delay in starting our services. It's going to take a while to get the locomotives ready.
Okay.
Now, the locomotives will be a mix of of coal and oil fired, because it's obviously a fire risk, and the oil fired locomotives doesn't pose a risk. And then we're also going to have a couple of Class 32 diesel locomotives that we can use on fire risk days.
Okay, that's interesting. So you will use a different locomotive depending on the height of risk of fire on a given day, which, given what Knysna went through not so long ago, you can understand must be a huge concern.
Yeah, of course. We're
Okay.
also going to set up cameras, and we've been in talks with the local fire people, and we'll continue to be in touch with them, closer and closer with them as time goes by.
Okay. Any other aspects of the renovation project that I haven't touched on or don't know to ask you about that you'd like to mention? We've spoken about clearing the railway. We've spoken about checking the integrity of the line. We've spoken about the sort of the train itself. Is there anything else you'd like to mention that is part of your sort of vision for what the finished experience is going to be like?
Yeah, we've also got a number of carriages, which at the moment are standing at the George at the Railway Museum in George.
Mm-hmm.
They'll have to be renovated, but we will be renovating them in George, and all the carriages and the locos will have to be road hauled into Sedgefield, because phase 2 of the reconstruction of the line will take another year.
Okay.
After phase 1 is complete. We're going to have to do major work on the Kymans River Bridge,
Yeah.
and on the Moorland River, where there's been major washaways, and on the Swartley River Bridge.
Okay, so yeah, I'm glad you've mentioned that, because I thank you for reminding me to talk about that. I mean, it's visible with the naked eye as you drive over the Kymans Path that there has been a lot of degradation around that bridge. So, but I mean, I'm assuming as part of your tender bid, you have had engineering teams look at it all and say it is possible, it is fixable.
That's correct.
Okay.
It is possible and it is fixable.
So the final question then is, okay, so a year from now, you'll be hopefully able to travel from Sedgefield to Knysna, and a year after that, the opposite direction to George. What kind of impact do you think that this is going to have on the Garden Route region in terms of employment and tourism income?
It's going to have a much bigger impact on tourism income than on employment. But of course, it is going to have some impact on employment. There will be opportunities for small businesses all the way along the route. The train itself won't employ that many people, but we will open opportunities for small businesses to, for instance, transport passengers who only want to go on a one-way trip from Knysna to Sedgefield or Sedgefield to Knysna.
Right.
So there'll be place for taxi operators and tour operators to run on that route, and we also expect to be able to open up opportunities for stall holders at the terminuses, so that people can provide visitors with food and other items.
Okay. It's just wonderful news. Martin, thank you for sharing it with us and for updating us on the big vision and the timeline, which is delightfully much shorter than I was anticipating you were going to tell us. So that's very good news indeed. And last thing to ask you before we say goodbye is where to send listeners who want more information and want to keep an eye on the sort of the progress of the various aspects of this job. You've got a website that's a good place for info, don't you?
Yeah, it's www.Outeniqua Choo Tjoe, CHOOTJOE.com.
.com. Okay, thank you so much for that. And Martin, thank you for joining us to update us this afternoon. Our best wishes to you and the whole team at Classic Rail and your associated contractors for wishing that this goes smoothly and that you're up and running and we're having a very different kind of celebratory conversation a year from now.
Thank you. If you want to make it happen, buy tickets.
Can you buy tickets already?
Not yet.
Not just yet. We'll keep you posted on that one.
We will focus on that shortly.
Okay. Thanks, Martin. Well, please keep in touch. Martin Hatcheul speaking there on behalf of Classic Rail, whose tender was successful for the rejuvenation of the Outeniqua Choo Tjoe.